I don't know, it was about a 2.5 year um partnership that kind of it started out really solid, and then it just kind of took its toll. So we'll talk a little bit about that through all of this.
Yeah, please, that'd be perfect. So it was for about 2 years, 2.5 years, you say?
Yes.
Cool. So it started off great. It felt like there was some legs to it. It had some momentum, and then something happened, or some things happened. So talk to what happened.
So it started out really well with good motives, good intentions, like really on a friend basis, which is how I like to start. Because you have to have that friend basis. If you don't have the friend basis, then I feel like people kind of go into it not really realizing that they're holding back.
Yeah.
Because you want somebody that you're with to really replicate the same things that you do, foundationally. And I think that we kind of veer away from that now. It's kind of an avoidance that is not only generationally creating, but it's also mainstream created. There's a lot of distractions, there's a lot of different things. So I think that a lot of people veer away from their core values, their structures, and all those sorts of things. So what ended it was the break in communication. So you start out really well and really strong in a relationship, and you're kind of really putting yourself out there. You give your best, and you really truly feel like you're putting everything out there, and like you just are who you are. And when that person accepts you for exactly who you are, then you feel confident and you feel secure and you feel happy, and you're you just it really works together. It's really cohesive, and it goes back and forth. There's give and take. There's an equalness to it. And then you get to a certain point where other people start coming into the relationship. Like, you meet outside factors, you meet work factors, you meet friends and family, and that's a good thing to talk about in the beginning, because because once you start inviting outside factors in, it can either strengthen, or it can weaken the relationship. That was the downfall for us, was there was a lack of that, and that kind of really came from, we grew up entirely different, very different. I grew up with very religious and spiritual structures, so much, in fact, that when I was going to CCD classes, I loved it so much, because I was just a godly child, that I wanted Baptist classes as well. So, as a very small child, I knew who I was. I knew what I was connected to. I knew what I was about. And I really stuck with that. And I grew up in a very structured foundation, family home, with those values and with that knowledge. And the partner that I had, well, he grew up in a very opposite way. He did not grow up in that same way, where his mother believed in spiritual and structural value in that sense. However, the father did not. His father was not emotionally or mentally available. And his mother was, they had it very different. Like, my mother did not work growing up until we were a little bit older. She was a home mom, and my father worked. He provided everything for us, and that's the structure that we grew up in. The structure he grew up in was very opposite, where both were required to work, and they were almost a bit competitive. So that kind of starts pulling away and pulling those threads when you start competing with your partner. And the relationship that my parents had, it just fell over a period of time, because once we started growing up as kids, then it was like, well, now who am I in this relationship for my mother? So it's interesting because there's no neither right or wrong in the way that we grow up. It it it's just really about foundational communication. And if you don't have foundational communication, you have a lack of ability to really understand somebody in the full sense that we can. And we can really expand in different areas if we're open-minded. But being open-minded means you have to be fully aware, fully present, and all that you are at all times. And I think that in a general statement, people will get into relationships and then get generally comfortable with where they're at. And it's once we get comfortable and we settle, we stop really actually investing. We're kind of just doing day-to-day things. And when we do that, we feel undervalued, underappreciated. We don't feel completely secure with ourselves, and we get a little bit bored. It's not challenging, and you want to be able to challenge your partner in the right ways at all times, because that promotes growth. So when you get stagnant, we get bored, we, just too many thoughts, and then we also can overthink as well, because then we start being judgmental. And when we're overthinking, we're thinking too much into things. So where I'm very, very confident and I am a very clear communicator with my partners, like because I'm emotionally available and I'm also spiritually available. So those were two things that were lacking. And I didn't realize till further down the road, I was playing the saving the partner. Let me help you. I can be, I can be as loving and compassionate as you need. But there's that point where you have, first of all, you cannot save anybody. Let's make that clear. The only person we can save is ourselves. And we save ourselves by allowing others to learn. And maybe just descriptively, I think that's number one, that's a huge pillar for me, is being descriptive. Because in being descriptive, that's a little bit different from just straightforward communication, which is just open-ended in a million ways. But being descriptive is like really just, it's being fully aware, consciously aware of where you are in that moment, and being humble and compassionate in the way that we're speaking in an open-minded statement to our partner. So where I will sit down and I am able to do that, and I will say, I really feel like this is unrequited right now, and I'm putting in this energy and time, and I don't feel valued, and I don't feel loved, and that makes me, in a sense, feel not safe, and not for the the misconception that I have abandonment issues, but safety to me is security. And that security to me is, yes, we have job financial stability on the side here. It's also foundational compassion within the relationship for me as well. So I'm able to describe these things. I'm able to explain myself. And then you have somebody who's not emotionally available, but they're a good person because you read their aura, you see how they behave, you see their intentions, and you see the expression on their face. So a whole different love language spoken sometimes is silently observed. And I'm very good with that, very connected with my intuition, where my partner was not so wonderful with their intuition and second guessed himself a lot. So it was actually one of the most significant relationships I have ever had in my life, because of the point that I was in my life when we had this relationship. For him. So this was a very big, significant period for both of us. And let's just throw COVID on top of it. So, you know, you have all this COVID going on. So there was a lot of downtime to get to really know each other and do things and spend a lot of time together until all the outside factors came in. But all of those outside factors came in because we didn't have a strong foundation. And as well as we thought that we did, because we were getting along, everything was great. Everything was like, it was like having that best friend, and you do things with, and you don't have to do everything with, but you have a lot of shared interests and enjoyable time together and doing things, and also wanting to know about each other, being inquisitive and wanting to learn, and showing that care and that those emotions that I am interested and I am drawn, and oh wow, this is very different. And that whole getting to know you period, I feel like moving forward, I would do as a friend for a good amount of time. And that's how I had always started out relationships, because that's what I was taught. I was taught that when I was much younger, we weren't allowed to date until we were 16. And then even at that, if you were mature enough and you were able to show good judgment. So it was a kind of trial and error type of thing, not necessarily specifically by age, but by maturity and by how you show. So there was no specific time limit. It was once we see that you can responsibly put yourself out there in a way that is respectful to yourself, then we'll take it slow and we'll go into that. So I learned in very slow, while my partner learned very, freight train fast, where he learned from men. So he had an emotionally unavailable father, very unemotionally available grandfather. Generationally, that went back. Men are men, women don't have an opinion. They are required to work. They are required to do just as much as them. And it's kind of like a shared household. This is how it's run. This is your role. This is your role. Well, it wasn't that defined for us. It was, but at the same time, there was always room for growth and change, because everything is ever changing. But that in his household, it was quite opposite. And so he didn't know how to be entirely emotionally available. And when things came in to play in the relationship that were new or unfamiliar to him, he wasn't adaptable. He wasn't flexible with that mindset. He had a very structured mindset, which seemed really great because, in the stability part, he was a workhorse and he knows how to function a whole household all on his own. I mean, you could take care of the entire yard, you could fix this, you're helping all these, your guy friends, and you're always putting in the extra work. Well, that's great. Those are great skills. You can work on cars, you can do these different things. These are amazing skills. But are you adaptable? He was not adaptable. He was not flexible. So in the beginning, I think we tend to have a mindset of, well, they'll grow into it, or they'll extend, or they'll get comfortable, and then they'll start shedding the skin and showing these things. But when you don't see that shedding or the welcoming over a period of time, you realize that's a skill that they don't have. So technically, I was living in the illusion that these things were going to happen and that they would present themselves over a period of time. But that didn't happen, because the truth was, I was overseeing my intuition, and I was not listening to my better judgment of what I knew, because I had this ideation of blind faith, meaning ignoring my intuition and going outside of it. But listening to your intuition is really key, and it's really important because it's there for a reason. So
Yeah.
that's your higher self, that's your higher knowledge, that's you. And ignoring that doesn't make you any keener. It just kind of makes you, a little foolish in the sense of self, of really just misbelieving and telling yourself a whole different story of of what you're feeling, why it's there, and it's there for a reason. So ignoring that for a little while led to, I would say, not stunting my growth, but altering my growth in a sense where it wasn't a plant where I was just growing straight up. I was growing around challenges. So I see it kind of like like a viney tomato plant and it's a beautiful journey, going your own journey. And there was some things that I definitely had to learn. And one of those things, okay, confession to the world, I guess, right? But those who know me know, I just didn't admit it to myself for so long. Healthy boundaries. I said it. Oh my God. Healthy boundaries was something that over years, and we'll say primarily with not just strangers, but family and siblings and my partner and, my kids. Oh my gosh, I had no healthy boundaries when I was a kid, when I was in my 20s. Like, oh man, I was very on my path. I was so in myself. I was so in my skin until dun, 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 I started healing and I started talking to people. And the feedback that I got back was bitter truth. So because it was hard for me to swallow and understand from that harsh perspective, not so caring. And it was caring. It just felt like it wasn't to me at that time because it was abrasive. It was hard to swallow. But they were things that had happened, and they did actually happen when I was much younger, elementary. Those massive traumas, the most life significant traumas that had occurred in my life. And so not talking about it for so many years, because back then, I mean, well, this really ages me, but we didn't have therapists. We didn't have the psychotherapists. We didn't have EMDR and just all these different things, CBT. There was just so many options that we didn't have at that time. So because of that, you grow up and it's like, okay, stop talking about it. Time to move forward. Put the big girl pants on and just walk forward through it. But what they didn't understand, and what I did but didn't know how to speak it comprehensively, was I need to process this. I need to process this, and I can't close it, and I don't have closure because I can't process it. And that's not how they grew up. So it was a matter of when I was in my 20s, at one of the most significant points in my life, I did not have the skills or the know-how to speak the dialect, to make that communication and express myself in the way that I can right now. I didn't have it. I didn't have those skills. So I clammed up, and I felt more rejected and abandoned by reaching out to very close relatives of mine, like the closest relatives, and they were kind of all on that same page, which made me feel rejected, abandoned, and so many different ways. And it wasn't meant that way, but that's all they knew, and I just didn't know. So then I felt very out of sorts, and then it was, well, then who am I? I don't fit in with anybody. Why am I so different? So I pulled myself back, and then I went down a whole different place in my life, and I kind of threw everything that I knew to the wind, which, well, I don't know, kind of sounds like a Jack Sparrow's type of thing right there, but I suppose it was in many senses of, well, it's just caution to the wind, and I'm just going to be the wild child. And well, there was a lot of things that were learned. There was a lot of growth. There was a lot of experiences in that.
So in
I
regards
un-
to your boundaries, like what was the key lesson that you learned that you needed boundaries, or what did you use to reinforce your boundaries?
I said I don't want to be manipulated, gaslit. I don't want any of these different things. And I pointed each and everything out. So I wrote everything down on a paper. I'm very good at writing. I'm sometimes better at writing than speaking. However, today I'm pretty chatty. So I wrote everything down, and then I said I would like to talk. And so, we came to the table, and there we were, and I was like, okay, I know where we are, because we're sitting at the table talking about this. And so he was a little bit defensive, and um I reassured him, and then said, these are the things that I need you. I don't feel respected in this sense when you do this, and it hurts me when you do this. And when I put in my valued time and my effort, and then you pull back and you go and do 100 different jobs just to keep yourself distracted from talking and showing emotion, that hurts. So it was a matter of coming down and really sitting down to discuss all of the things that
And how did he react
were
to that?
not well, not well. He closed up. I could He didn't say what was happening, but I could feel from my end, I could feel what was happening. So for him, he didn't know how to process it,
Yeah.
which is very similar to what I was just saying in my 20s. So that was the point that he got to, and I recognized that. And when I recognized that, I was like, oh my gosh, we're on whole different planes. Like, because that was me 20 years ago,
Yeah.
and that's him now. So I was like, oh, we are not on the same timeline. And then I was like, well, I didn't want to just completely let go of the relationship. So I continued to be more forward with how I was describing, and being very descriptive in my discussions, rather than just short and simple.
Yeah.
I then started to push him away, because he wasn't familiar with it.
Right.
So then, over, a short period of time, like, each thing that came out was like, okay, I would see it within a month or so, and then it was getting faster and faster. Um, so over, a 6-month period, there was a lot that was noted, and it was like each thing that would happen and each thing that would move forward, there was pullback to things, and it was, oh, he doesn't have the skills. So, and I'm not, well, no, I'm not going to say that. I I can be somebody who can be really compassionate,
Yeah, I
and
hear
I
that
can
in
be,
you. Yeah.
and I can be somebody that can also be very straightforward and very blunt and non-reactive. So I think the two were where I was very vastly different, but it was depending on whatever the situation was and what he was presenting to me. So I had started at that point in what far down in the relationship, then having to put boundaries up where I really should have made them known very in the very beginning,
Yeah,
and
right.
saying, these are the things that I really, I adore in people, I appreciate, I'm open to, but these are my boundaries.
Yeah.
And I was like, we're doing this backwards.
Yeah, I hear the epiphany of like when you had that moment of like, oh my God, like we're doing it all backwards.
They're
And
so backwards.
so
Yeah.
moving forward, like what would you for the next relationship, if you want another relationship after this one, yeah?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Great. So
Well, I thought,
what would you do differently next time?
well, since I've spent a vast amount of time healing myself, that's important. And I would really, like I said, the foundation for me would be being friends with somebody.
Yeah,
So I have to know that I have a friend basis, because when you go into a relationship with passion, passion can fizzle out.
totally.
And when you go into a relationship where you're friends, you have a partnership. I
Yes.
want a partnership. I Passion is great, but I can have passion with my best friend,
Yeah.
where I want something that's solid, equal give and take, and somebody that can communicate, and somebody who doesn't have any complete structured ideas, but is open to spirituality, is open
Mhm.
to, you know, different methods and ways of going about relationships. And that's actually one thing I really, really, really admire in you, is you put yourself out there by example. And that's what I know. That's typically how I am. That's how I teach others, is I am the example and I'm putting myself out here for you. So you
Yeah.
see, if I'm saying like, just really put yourself out there and be blunt and be confident and be courageous and do these wonderful things and step outside of your comfort zone, stay outside of your comfort zone.
Yes.
Oh, we can coach the world by leading with example.
Totally
And
agree.
you do an amazing job with that, by the way.
Thank
It's
you, Jessica.
amazing.
I'd love to recap what you've said there. So,
Yeah.
you got in this relationship. It was tying with like COVID, so there was like overlay of COVID in there. You got together and you realized you had lots of things in common that were like friendshipy things, like you have to do things together. And then over time, you started to realize as these outside people started to come in, that they influenced the relationship. And then how he was raised versus how you were raised, he was really rigid. So to be able to speak to him, to be able to bounce things off him, he was not ready to accept the humility around like, hey, maybe there's more to life. Maybe there's something else I can bring into my life. And he may have been
Yeah.
great at all of the practical things like working in the garden or fixing things, but in reality, you really wanted him to be emotionally available. So in that whole journey, you realize that having your boundaries, which is from the back in your 20s, where like the boundaries started to erode, and back in your adulthood now, like your boundaries are so important, and you have this solid list of things that you would present to a future partner of like, hey, look, this is my line in the sand. If you cross it, like we're good, like we're done.
Yeah.
And it feels like moving forward, you really want that friendship first, because passion's great and passion fizzles out. But a friendship, you know deep down that friendship's got longevity because you can talk and you can
Yeah.
create things and you can be curious. How does that sound for you?
That really wraps it up. So it was one of the biggest learning and pivotal points for me in a relationship. So in reality, that relationship that I had was one of the biggest blessings that I have ever had, because I was so consciously aware of all the things that happened from beginning to end.
Yeah.
And it didn't it didn't end very well. It ended in an unfortunate type of space, because I had to give myself closure.
Yeah,
That's something I learned. I learned that a very long time ago. If you expect closure from people, you may die waiting for that, because
totally.
um you have to be able to give yourself closure in order to be healthy, and that's a form of self-care and self-love. And that was another thing. He didn't know how to do that. He didn't know how to heal, and he had all this repressed trauma. And I said, well, I've been doing EMDR and I got him in the
Oh
EMDR. I
wow.
was so happy, but he didn't stick with it
Yeah,
because,
right.
and that was another thing that I hadn't realized. Um, I didn't, I didn't, I didn't allow myself to kind of catch that. I would leave the room so that he could have that discussion. It wasn't with the EMDR therapist. It was with someone, a different specialist. So I was like, oh, and I didn't have the discussions. I would say how did it go? I just kind of left it very private. So I really kind of closed myself out of that by not discussing it, and just even a quick little summary of how do you feel, or
Mhm.
are you okay, or how can I accommodate, respecting what you're processing right now. Just a
Yeah,
little
I love what you've spoken to there, Jessica. Like, and also being able to forgive yourself over, like, hey, I only knew what I knew. Like, I think because a lot of people get really hard on themselves when they stay in a relationship that's gone over whatever their intuition said
Yeah,
no to. So yeah, it's really I need to wrap it up, and I just really want to acknowledge, like, you've you've done so much work on yourself, and then
yeah,
to be able to find someone that values you and for the work that you've done, and then also has their own toolkit to go through whatever comes up for them, is really important for you in partners going forward. And I think those are really important pillars that you've spoken to for anyone looking for a relationship that's got longevity in it.
absolutely. Very well said.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you so much. I'm going to just stop record, and then I'd love to just quickly finish up the chat, and then we can both